Dan Hasler,
Yep.
welcome to Coached.
Thanks very much for having me.
When you've got a pedigree of athletes that you are known to work with at a very high level, we're talking some of the best players in the competitions, the best players of their generations, Shaun Johnsons, Nathan Clearys. Why do those sort of athletes reach out to you?
I think there's different reasons for different athletes. So in Nathan's case, for example, I'm engaged by the Penrith Panthers, so he can't get away from me. So,
Got him there?
yeah, like he tries to walk away and I just chase after him. No. And to be honest as well, with Shawnee, like that was through an existing relationship I had with the Sharks. And when things moved on, when he moved on, when I moved on from the Sharks, we just maintained that relationship. And I think the bottom line is, the people who are at the top of their game understand that it's all about just continual self-discovery, about continual exploration of what's at the edge of their ability, what's at the edge of their understanding of their capacity. And certainly in my field, like the mental skills space, what I've learned is that everyone knows how important it is, but very few people actually take a deliberate approach to it. In the Panthers' case, and in Nathan's case, we do. In Shaun's case, he did. And what we're starting to see, and I think it's because, if I'm being honest, of things like this, where this space is now being more normalized. Kobe Bryant always spoke about it. Jordan would talk about mindset stuff. But I think even when they were doing it, it was kind of like, yeah, but that's them. But now, I've got a 16-year-old lad who's pursuing a career in sport, and it's as normal to him as nutrition is. It's as normal to him as doing your sprint training. So I think more and more athletes now are going, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I will have a look at that. I reckon maybe 5-10 years ago, it was almost sort of seen as, oh, you only need that if you're struggling. Whereas now I think people are seeing it as a genuine performance enhancer.
I think that's a really important point, the struggling side, right? Like athletes are definitely now far more proactive than reactive. So instead of waiting for their career start to fall to pieces or off-field dramas or whatever else where they then, they have to check into rehab. I'm using that as the extreme, right? Yeah. Versus, what, maybe I'm just not feeling 100% with something to do with my performance.
Yeah.
I'm going to be on the front foot and reach out, try to get it early, just like I would with my speed training off-season, as you mentioned there. Like that might be an area of focus, versus waiting for worst case scenario to happen. Is that something you would start to say? I truly believe athletes are way smarter now than what we give them credit for, especially in sort of like this sort of space when they're looking at what can I add to my toolkit? What can I add that the other players aren't doing around me?
Yeah, again, I think, so broadly speaking, I don't know, I'm not sure if smart's the right word, but but what I would say, no, and I'm not saying they're not smart, just to be clear. What I'm saying is I think they're just more informed. It's just more out there. So you look at the Netflix docos, you look at, so I'm just watching Starting Five, and you look at the amount of work that these athletes who are at the top of the game, in the top of the world, right? So NBA, the elite of the elite in terms of money and preparation and all that, and just the amount of work that they do on their own. They've got their own trainers. They've got their own nutritionists, their own chefs. That I think Jimmy Butler's got his own barista, right? That's taking things to the extreme, right? But it's this essence of having ownership of your career, and I think you don't need to be a millionaire to have ownership of your career. What ownership of your career means is understanding that, of course, one way of having an athletic career is just wait to be told and do everything you're told and do it as well as you can, and then produce. That's one way to have a career. Another way to have a career is do everything you're told by your coaching staff, but also be driving it yourself. And that's where I think these athletes that really do set themselves apart, sometimes they might be seen as a little bit out there. Sometimes they might be seen as a little bit bullish, or some coaches certainly don't like it, right? But the best coaches understand that if you want an athlete to own the moment, they have to own their game. They have to own who they are. They have to own their performance. They have to own their edges. Everything. And so to your question, I just think that it's just becoming more of a commonplace narrative in not just elite sport, but the emerging pathways as well.
You talk about like basketball, US, that's my bread and butter. Love it. You talk about like Michael Jordan mentality, the Kobe mentality. Beyonce's another great example of this. Like when they go and they perform, they put on almost a mask, and who they are on the basketball court, like Kobe turned into the Black Mamba. You know, Beyonce turns into Sasha Fierce, an example. Is that where they're using that as, this is where I walk onto the field, the court, the pitch, whatever it is, the stage, I'm a different person. This is who I am times 100. Like it amplifies everything. So like you talk about, going back to like example there before with Nathan, when he crosses that white line, does he change into someone different, or does he always still stay Nathan Cleary, the one that you know off the field?
Good question. I think you'd have to ask him to truly know that. But what I would say is athletes like Nathan and anyone, you know, of the ilk that you've just mentioned there, you know, Beyonce is a performer. You know, people might not see a performance artist the same as a sporting athlete, but absolutely the principles hold, right? She has to walk out there and bring her best. There's no, you know, there is no room for anything less than that. And so what I would suggest is that people who put themselves in that arena have to bring with it their highest performance, their best performance mindset, their peak performance mindset. And if that includes a persona that they adopt, which helps them go into that space. I work with a Wallaby he's Alan Alalatoa, he's captain the Wallabies, and he talks about he has to really bring out this darker side to him because that's what's required. Off the field, he's the most loving, softly spoken father, husband, you know, but on the field, he'll rip your head off, you know. And so being able to bring that, and I think that speaks to something a little deeper, actually. I think it speaks to this idea of when I go on the field, that is not my identity. So it's funny, we were just talking about this with the Penrith players this morning, like, and I'll share it with you. It's just an idea I've been riffing with, and I don't know. I don't know if I sometimes have ideas which I think are that good, it can't possibly be my idea.
Yeah,
right? It's like
you've stolen it from somewhere.
I must have just like absorbed this. But so I'll just put it out there. Then maybe in the comments people can say, "No, mate, that's not your idea. I've seen it before." Which, if it's true, cool, because then I can quote someone appropriately. But what we're saying is, you know, like this idea of athletes and high performers, people who are good at what they do, can fall into a trap where they become what they do. Yes. I am what I do, right?
Well, that's what you associate yourself as. I am a rugby league athlete.
Exactly, right? And so if footy's going well, I'm going well. But if it's not, then who am I? And we were talking about how if I am what I do, then every session becomes almost like an assessment on who I am as a person. So what we want to try and separate is I am and what I do, right? So we take the sentence, I am what I do, split it, I am. So who are you? And what we're saying is, footy isn't your identity. Footy is where you get to express parts of your identity, parts of identity that you choose. So you think of someone, you know, Jerome Luai, right? He expresses himself on the footy field, part of his identity on the footy field, maybe an amplified version of a part of his identity, because that is his peak performance state. There's no point him being the incredible family man he is with all his kids when he's got, you know, blokes who are 20 kilos heavier than him charging at him at full pace. Right? He needs to bring that. So I actually think this idea of a persona, it really speaks to that idea of I am not what I do. I am over this, and I'll take whatever I need from this and pour it into there so I can bring my best in the moment. But also, if that doesn't go as well as I'd hoped, it doesn't mean I completely crumble as a person, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, you've worked with enough athletes to know that I'm going to say this actually, the vast majority of athletes I work with early in their career can't separate those two things.
I think even to take that a step further, I would say a lot of coaches can't separate those two things. They only identify themselves as coaches. And same deal again, like when business is going really well, for example, or they're going really well, they're flying high.
I know when athletes retire, you know, that's a big thing. That's why I think the work that, you know, I frame mental skills on the foundation of that. Like the first thing I'll do with an athlete is, who are you without a ball in your hands? And the amount of kids, and I'll say kids, you know, 21, 22-year-olds who look back at me as if I'm speaking French. Like, what do you mean? You know, who are you? And
Can I interrupt? And sorry if I do. Like, do many of them actually know who they are at 21, 22?
I don't think many 21, 22-year-olds know who they are necessarily. So that in itself. So the question or the challenge is, it's a hard question to answer for anyone.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's compounded when you're good at something, because these kids, and 21, 22, right? For the vast majority of these kids, most conversations they've had in their life have revolved around what they do. And when I say most conversations, I mean most conversations with family friends or their uncle that they've not seen for 6 months. He comes around, he doesn't ask, "Hey Dan, how are you, mate? How's life?" First question, "Hey Dan, how's the footy?"
Yeah.
And if footy's good, and I'm speaking from experience here, you know, when I was 19, 20, if footy was going well for me, I was first down the stairs out my room, can't wait to see all the family friends, let's talk about it, it's going great. If I'd been dropped, if I was injured, if I didn't think, oh geez, it's not going my way, I'd be hesitant to come down those stairs because I knew what was coming. I knew I was going to have a conversation. And so it's quite interesting that, you know, I sort of reflect back on the work I do now and kind of go, geez, you know, I probably could have used this myself. It's just that if we go back to the smart versus informed,
Yeah.
you know, I'm talking like late 90s, you know, like we didn't have, you know, I had a childhood. I was out on my bike, you know, I wasn't scrolling Instagram getting inspiration from all these world-class athletes. So, so I think it's, so I think that's a long-winded way of answering the question of, is it the same person? I don't think it is, because I don't think they can be, and I don't think it's. I actually don't think it would serve people well to put all of themselves into this one thing. I think it's just too risky on a number of levels. Yeah,
I think that's a great summary, and I think the informed versus smart's probably a good distinction to circle
I
right
was
back.
smart.
To circle right back to that. It's funny, I caught up with a mate last week for coffee or whatever, and he actually, we got chatting, and I didn't actually know, he was actually a trained psychologist. And so he actually gave some insights that I didn't think he had, which is, again, like, I guess all these people have layers and that you don't know. I've known him for about 2.5 years. I did not know he was a trained psychologist. Right. And he was explaining one of the players this year probably had the best season of their career. Basically, he knew him as a child all the way through. And this is very similar to like what you were saying there around his identity and being involved. I think this probably leads beautifully into this sort of question around like your environment and who's around you. He would say, like, you'd come up to him and say, "Mate, that was a great game, well done." And doesn't matter, he'd look over into the crowd, and if his mum had a smile on his face, he'd be stoked. And it was all good. But if his mum did not have a smile on his face, that was it. It was literally like his world was ending.
Yep.
You know, how important is it to have like a steady and stable environment around you as well, not just yourself, because it's really easy to try to get better yourself, but it's also really hard when everyone around you may not be on that same wavelength.
Yeah. So I've got so many thoughts on this. So one of the biggest myths or mistakes that people have made in the whole mindset, mental toughness, resilience space is that they framed it as a you problem. You need to be more resilient. You need to turn up with the right mindset, right? And what they've completely underplayed is the role that the environment plays. They've completely underplayed how they were raised. They've completely underplayed the cultural norms that that are present. And so what we try and do, and when I say we, the people I work with, so I won't work with people if they're not going to buy into this idea. So the idea is that we are all going to go on a journey of learning together. I'm going to be doing as much learning in our relationship, as, you know, with you, the athlete, as hopefully you are. And the reason for that is that I can't possibly know what you need to do to improve your mindset or resilience until I get to know you, right? Until I get to know your relationship with your parents, until I get to know, you know, what it was like for you in year 9 when you took a risk and everyone laughed at you. I was speaking at NRL rookie camp 2 years ago. This was, and I asked the lads there. I said, "When do you feel the most pressure?" And there were the first 2 hands went up. So that in itself, right? There was a lot of pressure. No one wants to go first. So and eventually we got some hands. The first 2 hands. One was like, after I've made a mistake. Okay, makes sense. The second one was if I have to take the game-winning shot. The third one was when my dad watches. I feel the most pressure when my dad's watching. And what was really interesting was that, you know, when you're in a room and everyone gets it,
like the air comes out of the room.
The air comes out and all the nods and everyone's sort of like giving each other knowing looks. And so, this is a way to sort of dig into this idea. How important is the other people around you? The question is, how are the important people around you, right? So how are the important people in your life around you? So if my kid makes a mistake, and I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not winning any awards for this, but it's something I continually try and work on. You know, if a kid makes a mistake on the footy field, right, and let's just say it's under 8s, under 9s, right? The first thing that kid will often do is look to the sideline for some sort of support or something, right? Same if they score a try or a goal, they'll look to the sideline for approval. So when they make a mistake, they're looking to the sideline for support. If they see the eye roll, the far out, you know, then that moment undermines any inspirational chat you might get. Just do your best, we love you, this, that, and the other. I've worked with athletes who genuinely believe their parents love them more when they win. Now, I can't believe that's true, but I can absolutely believe how they can think it's true, you know?
And that's that whole, I might be thinking too global here, but perception is reality, right? Like, and they truly believe that?
Absolutely.
Is that the stories they tell themselves? Is that part of it as well? Have they ever, I don't know, again, might sound so simple, but have they ever actually asked their parents, is that true?
Yeah, so a lot of them don't ask that, but because, you know, there's a lot of hierarchy and power dynamics, and if you're talking to, you know, I don't know what age people start feeling more comfortable. I mean, some are quite comfortable quite early challenging their parents, but I think it's what we've got to understand about mindset and things is that often it's very subconscious. So when they say that, it's not like they've actually sat there and written it down and objectively analysed it. It's just a feeling and a belief that they have. It's not a rational thought that they've, you know, oh, well, this must now be true. It's just something that's there. It's a bias, right? So it's interesting, right? Because then when we do the work around what we call our inner circle, we're saying, okay, well, who are the important people around you? And what do you need from them? And you need to be able to put boundaries in place with those people, right? And so what we mean by that is, and this is very huge generalized things, but there could be a period of time after a game where you don't want to talk about it, whether you've won, lost, or not. And so what's important is that for those important people around you to know that.
Yeah.
Because if you just come in and go, you know, offering all your worldly advice about how you could have played better, that's either going to lead to silence or lead to some form of resentment or lead to an argument, right? So how important is it that they know? Very important. It's important to know what they need from you. And if they can't subscribe to that, then again, this gets increasingly more doable, I think. This gets increasingly more doable, I think, as you get older, is being able to say, okay, cool, I'll call you. So I know there's a bloke who's retired from the NRL now, who literally put that boundary in place with his mum. Like, he would say, don't call me after a game, wait for me to call you. And it was just a way of him being able to enter into a conversation when he was ready, because he knew that mum was always just going to be analysing the game and talking about this, or why didn't you get enough game time, or whatever it might be. So, yeah, so long answer. All my answers are long, but you know, it is so nuanced. And for the most part, I think parents just want what's best for their kids. It's just that they don't understand that sometimes their actions aren't what's best for their kids.
Yeah, and it's natural instinct, right? If you, well, I think it's natural instinct anyway. You make an error, and you just happen to look over and you see your dad or mum or grandpa or whoever's there supporting you. They may not even know that they're doing it either. Like, it's not like they consciously put their head down when you make a mistake or anything like that. Like, it just happens. Yeah. And, you know, to take that as gospel.
So I'll give you an insight, actually. So I had this insight only last year. So my son was playing, and he made an error on the field, and I can't remember what I did, but I said something or did something. And now, fortunately, we're not on the sidelines when we're watching Jackson. We're sort of back in a stand, so it's less easy for him to see. But my wife was next to me, and she turns and says, "What are you doing? You know, you can't be like this." And you know, why are you acting? And I said, and what I realised was, I wasn't disappointed at him. I was disappointed for him.
Yeah.
But to an outsider, it would look exactly the same. You know what I mean? It would look like I was fuming at him, and I wasn't. It was just I was my behaviours were just, oh mate, you know, like, oh, that's unlucky, you know, but the way I was behaving could have, to an outsider, could have looked like, Jesus, you can't react like that if a kid drops a ball. So it was an interesting moment for me. So now I'm trying to keep somewhat more stoic on the sideline regardless.
What more neutral?
What more neutral, which is, I was really doing that a lot last year with the, just when I'm around the players or when I'm around the team environment, is just trying to remain really quite neutral. So I don't, this is funny. So in last year's grand final, when with about, 90 seconds to go, and we'd won. You know, and the boys, if you look at the thing, the boys all run down to be on the sideline ready for the whistle. I'm not sure if it's there, but if it was panned back to the players area where I was sitting, I'm still there sitting, just sitting, just waiting, not getting carried away.
Get the nickname statue soon. You're just not doing anything.
But it was something I was really deliberate on. It was just trying to maintain that.
I'm going to throw one at you just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
In that environment, 4-time premierships, 4 years in a row. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't come with the challenges, like to be able to back it up year after year. Like, that's a different level of resilience, which we probably don't have enough time to speak about. But would you say it's easier even to do and be like quote unquote neutral when you're winning in a team environment versus when you're losing week after week after week? You just can't get a right call. Yeah. Players are getting injured in unfortunate circumstances. It feels like the refs are against you. Like, nothing's going your way. Do you find that would be easy to be neutral when you're winning, or easy to be neutral when you're losing?
I think it's definitely easier to pull back to what you might call this sort of like your equanimity, like that middle spot. When it's easier to pull back, I think, from a place of euphoria, happiness, than it is if you're completely in the doldrums, right? But that in itself is a mental skill. So understanding that, we can't allow confidence to be outsourced externally. So we can't allow, an athlete can't allow their confidence to be based on whether they're winning or losing, whether they're getting good calls or bad calls. They have to base their confidence on the work done, the processes they're adhering to, and understanding that sport is based on luck. It's based on people making mistakes. If it was based purely on who does the work and who's the best, no one would watch it because it would be boring, right? Because we just know. So it's predicated on us not quite reaching that point that we need to get to, or a bad ref's call or whatever, right? So understanding that confidence comes from the work done. So if you're the team that's losing constantly, right? And you can sort of draw your own correlations here to who you might be thinking of. But understanding, well, okay, if we were to zoom out of that, what does it look like? What's the culture? What's the which way are we trending? Are things on the improve? Things never improve as quickly as we want in life, right? But if we can have the confidence of going, okay, we're moving in the right direction, and we know that we're going to add things to that, elements to that, different ways of doing things, different talent, whatever, processes, you name it, then our guess is that it's going to improve. That's what it's got to be about. See, when I'm talking about performance coaching or mental skills or whatever, one of my opening sort of pitches to the people I work with is I'm interested in results, but I'm not focused on them. I'm focused on the manner of the performance. So when you were talking about resilience, when you've won X amount of comps, or not letting complacency set in or whatever, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the manner of the performance. So if we're winning, but we're getting away with it, that's a problem. Now in lesser performing environments, it's not a problem. We're winning, right? If we're losing, but the behaviors are right, okay, of course we wanted to win, but we're going to double down on those behaviors. In a lesser performing environment, I don't actually understand the behaviors that we're doing. It's just all about results. And if we've got then the pressure from board members, or we look to pay too much attention to the media or whatever it might be, then we actually don't know what it is we should be doing. So Shaun, for example, and he spoke about this when he came on my podcast, when we first connected to work one-to-one, he was having a tough time of it. Cooper Cronk had just said on Fox Sports that he's not fired a shot and he should probably retire. And this is going back a fair few years when he was at the Sharks. And so one of my first questions to him was, well, tell me what good looks like. What does good look like for you? And he said, honestly, I don't know. Shaun Johnson, he'd won the Golden Boot a few years before, couldn't tell me what good looked like anymore because he'd had so much noise from everywhere, fans, the media. The Sharks were sort of an up and down team. It was an interesting time. So so I often look at that. When you look at, I was talking to Kevy at the Panthers this morning, Kev Kingston, he's the wellbeing guy. I said, have you, because he's been there ages, I said, have you ever heard any of the coaching staff here ever blow up and give a spray at a player? And he's going, and he's like, nah, like maybe in sort of like, 18, 19 or whatever, when maybe coincidentally they were struggling a bit. Because in my time there, and I've spent a lot of time around that environment, never. Like, they'll give direct feedback, they'll give instructions, but there's never any, what the F's this, and come on, that's shit, or it's quite remarkable, right? And my question, I guess my question is, and it's does that level of equanimity and that calmness, does that breed success, or do you only have that because of success? And my guess is it's probably a bit of a symbiotic. It's probably two sides of the same coin, but it's understanding what success looks like. And as you, and for me, just to be clear, success looks like getting the behaviors right. If you get the behaviors right, the outcomes will largely take care of themselves. Sometimes they won't, because that's sport. But it's understanding what the behaviors look like. What does the culture feel like? And once you get clear on that, because if you're not clear on that, you're leaving everything to chance. And that's where you'll go on this sort of roller coaster thing. So.
Yeah, I've got two thoughts to that. One, I think if you were to take two coaches box, even grand final day, you got Ivan Cleary.
Yeah.
Always looks just cool, calm and collected. Maybe not on the inside, but on the outside. That coaching box to me seems quite relaxed.
Yeah.
Intense, but relaxed. Versus Bellamy's box, Craig Bellamy, you probably got spit flying on the window. Like, it always looked like you're on edge in that box. For me, if I was a part of that staff, I'd definitely prefer to be in the cool, calm environment. But I know that a lot of people thrive in that environment too, where things are on edge all the time. Both have very successful coaching careers, both have very successful programs, both have a lot of, if you're looking from a culture standpoint, phenomenal culture. Players either leave those programs to other clubs because of how good they are, and when they enter those other clubs, they bring those standards with them. So then my question to you off the back of that is, where does culture start? Does it start at the top with the board, the coaching staff, and comes down? Or does it start with the players and goes up?
Yeah, I think it depends. So I can speak. So from the Panthers' point of view, Ivan was very clear on his second time in charge there of addressing the culture and setting what he felt was to be the direction. But the culture isn't just one person, or it's not just the direction. It requires people to buy in. And I think what he did, which was very deliberate, very smart, was he understood the importance of community out at Penrith. And so the culture, and again, he's spoken about this quite openly, but the culture and the vision is to be a source of community pride for the Penrith area. And when you got, as we know, the fabled Penrith system and all the juniors that come through there, it's a no-brainer. So you're setting the vision for the people and the culture for the people who are going to form that culture. I think sometimes people get it wrong where they think it's, because it has to, I guess the answer to your question is it probably has to be both. If you've got someone who's trying to set the culture and it's just not there, And again, think of any coach which has lost the dressing room, for example, right? There's a version of that, or that's where the players want to set the culture, but it's just not. It's just not
tangible, achievable. It might be too far out of reach.
Yeah, or just not
realistic. Is that
useful?
Yeah,
might be a better way of putting it. You know what I mean? Like it's just not what's required in a high performing environment. High performing environments like sporting teams, they are so abnormal. Most people have no idea. Most people go, "Oh, it must be great to work in sport. It must be," and it is, of course, it's amazing. But it's really unusual. It's really unusual to walk into a room of people whose sole interest is how do we get better today. You go to any workplace, anywhere else, that is not the norm. The norm is how do we get through today. The norm is how do I keep my head down? How do I not take anything more on today, right? And again, that massive generalization. But when you get into that abnormal scenario, if your coach and your board, your playing group aren't aligned, it can't work. So if you're comparing your Bellamy to that system, that works for that place. Because if I go to Melbourne as a player, I know exactly what I'm walking into because I've been watching him for 20 years on TV, right? So do you know what I'm saying? Like, so if I'm going to Melbourne, I know what I'm going to get. I've spent a day in Melbourne, sort of going around the facility. So I don't know the culture, but I kind of know the culture. Mm. It's that strong. People who don't know the culture kind of know the culture. You 100%. Know what's expected. Whereas again, I won't name any names, but I'm pretty sure if you went through just take the NRL table, you just went through, I bet you'd have a hard time understanding what was expected in other environments because it's just not that strong. People come and go, coaches come and go. There's not enough time to actually even set the culture. You know what I mean? Because people come and go, so they bring in new people, and new people mean new culture, right? So it's The
revolving wheel continues in some of those environments.
Exactly.
Do you think as well, like we talk about the Bellamys and the Clearys, as in Ivan Cleary, they also withhold the standard themselves. They're not one to say this is the standard and then they go dip off and go do their own thing. Like, I know for a fact that they, more often than not, are the first ones in the facility. More often than not, the last ones to leave. They're there training. So when the boys turn up, they see the coach doing work. Like, even if we take that and take a step back to like just business, how important is it like that once that culture is set by quote unquote the top or the people that probably have more say than others, that it's actually withheld from their perspective and their standards so that people can see that. Because the moment you see that, it's like, well, if that's how it is, that's how it is. It's pretty hard to argue with when you're seeing it, you're tangibly seeing it. It's pretty hard to argue. Anyone can say words, but seeing it in real time is two different things.
And not seeing it is the worst thing, right? It's because it just breeds, people think they're hypocrites. It breeds, like there's no trust. It's like, where's the integrity? You're asking me to do that. How many times do people say, I'll often say, what do you think of the best leader you've ever had, for argument's sake, right? Or think of the best coach you've ever had, or da-da-da. And say, what did you like about it? And they'll say things like, they believed in me, they saw my potential. But a few lines down, when you start, it's like they'd never ask you to do something they wouldn't do themselves. Something along those lines, right? And it's amazing, this idea of role modeling. That's what we're talking about, role modeling. I think role modeling is one of the, I reckon behavioural psychologists are pretty clear on this. I think this. That role modeling is the strong, or one of the most strongest forms of education, of coaching, of leadership. Let me show you what I mean here. This is what I mean when I say, be professional. This is what I mean when I say, be prepared. Whatever, right? This is what I mean. Because if I'm preaching, little things aren't little, high performance habits, and I rock up 5 minutes late, or I rock up and I'm fluffing around with my notes or the presentation slides out of whack. It's only a little thing, but I've just spent the past half a season telling you little things aren't little, don't miss that line by a meter, So whatever it looks like, if whatever your philosophies are, of course it looks, if I'm presenting, if my little things are different to, an athlete's, but the principle holds. So whether it's the head coach, S&C, physio, whatever. If I'm extolling the virtue of something, I have to live that.
But you can easily see like the A players will always be A players. It's like the B and C players is just a general term, you're not actually athletes. They look out of place when they're in those environments because that's just, and they meet the standard and they become A players very quickly, or they ultimately just fall off to the side and get sort of weeded out pretty quickly. You find that like tends to be the case as well.
Yeah, definitely, because it's those A players, if we're calling them that really are the they set the tone, or they actually no. So let's say your head coach sets the tone, they're gonna dial up the volume on that tone.
Makes sense. I know.
I want to hammer that metaphor.
I know the analogy you're going with.
You know. So they're the ones who are like. Ivan, just talks about Isaiah Yo, over and over again as he just is the standard, like he is just the consummate, in fitness, in preparation, in you name it. And I've heard other coaches talk about it, like the influence of those players, that if they're doing the little things, that's 10 times more important or more powerful than the coach saying, hey, do the little things. And as you said, so then the players who are ready for that environment, they just gravitate to those people and they start, you become the sum of the people around you or something, 5 people around you, you start taking on those things, and whereas others might go, oh, geez, this isn't for me. And as you say, they either get weeded out or they choose to leave, maybe this isn't the right spot.
And like we talk about that, like first thing that comes to my mind is like consistency. Like they consistently do those things over and over again. It's not like it's for 2 weeks or 2 months and it dips. It's always an ever-growing process of being consistent. Like going back again to performers, there was I think one of Drake's security guards the other day they said like, what's the number one thing you learned from Drake over the last 8 years? And he's like, consistency. He goes, every night he turned up, no matter whether he was tired, sick, had done 50 shows before. He goes, almost every single show you could freeze frame it and press play, and it was the exact same show. It's just the ultimate consistency across the board. And you think about that with the players, that they don't have those peaks and troughs in their games, or game, if you want to look at it like a macro, or zoom out a little bit more, in a year they don't have these peaks and troughs. They stay relatively consistent. Consistency isn't sexy. It's probably the least sexy thing in the world. How do you drill home that sort of message there around like just doing those little things over and over and over again? Is it what's your philosophy around that?
So that comes back to that idea of the little things aren't little, and I actually riff on this a little bit when I'm giving presentations to people. So in the 2023 grand final, when Nathan did his thing, and just had 20 minutes from heaven. When he sort of, there was some commentary from Andrew Johns where he said something like, Nathan Cleary stands up in the big moments. And that sounds beautiful. It's great rhetoric. It's brilliant, except it's just not true, right? It's true he stands up in big moments, but it's not the full story. He stands up every day. He stands up when no one's looking. He stands up in the littlest of little moments. He leads by example in team meetings. So we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our habits. So if we want to be a world-class performer, if we want to win a comp, then you have to be winning it every day. You don't just win it on grand final day, right? And that's how I try and frame it, because he said consistency is boring. High performance actually is quite boring. You don't go out, you eat the same food. You know what I mean? So we have to jazz it up a little bit. So it's like, you want to win the grand final? Sweet, let's start winning now, shall we? And I'm not talking about going out there and dominating the day and all this alpha male nonsense. What I'm talking about is just taking ownership of your career, setting yourself goals that you can achieve on the daily, which are 100% in your control, and do it. And then do it again tomorrow, and do it again tomorrow. And when the motivation starts to drop, do it again. And if you need people around you, that's sweet, because there's a whole organisation here who are invested in helping you be your best. So lean on them, go and talk to them, let's sort it out. And your mate next to you, he's doing the same thing. So when he's down a little bit, lift him up. We hold each other accountable. It's a collective effort. And this is the same even if you're an individual athlete, right? You know, you have your team around you. But the point is, it's like, did I show up today? Yeah? Cool. No? Okay, turns out you're human. Sweet. Let's double down tomorrow, shall we? And let's make some gains that we didn't quite make today. And that doesn't have to be running harder necessarily. It doesn't have to be lifting more weights. It could be sleep. You know better than I do in that space, like, you know, the recovery element of it. So the consistency piece, you know, consistency beats intensity every day, right? So, and this applies for everything, you know. So I'll share with you this because I thought this was really cool. So in about a couple of weeks leading into the final series, Jess Fox and Naomi Fox came into the Panthers, and we had a chat, and they presented to the boys about what it takes to bring your best in that gold medal event where, you know, it's every 4 years, it's now or never, blah, blah, blah. And Jess had this incredible phrase, which I've never heard before, which is surprising because I think I've heard a lot of things, which I, you know, but she goes, when she was ready to go, she has this line where she says, I deserve to do my best. Right, which I'm really cool. I think is really cool because a lot of the times people will say, oh, I'll just do my best, or I deserve this, I deserve to win, or I deserve to be here, right? But to be able to sit there at the stop before she drops into this ridiculous event, you know, she can say to herself, I deserve to do my best. And so that for me is like ultimate confidence. Why? Because confidence comes from the work done. You can only say that and believe it if you're going, yeah, I've done the work. So what I've started doing is saying, okay, whatever your pinnacle event is. So for a kid, it could be HSC or VCE. For an adult, it could be a job interview. It could be a big pitch. For an athlete, it could be a big event or a trial or whatever. What's it going to take for you to be, just before you step into that arena, say, I deserve to do my best? What's it going to take starting now? You know, what do we need to do every day in order for you to be able to say that when we walk in? And that's when you can start charting these behaviours, right? Because for me, it's you know, that mantra, you know, and a lot of people think, you know, mindset and mental skills, mantras are only useful if they're built on the work. If you try and bullshit yourself, go, oh, I've got this, and you know you haven't, because you haven't done the work, you took a shortcut, you missed the reps, you didn't do your rehab. Self-talk is self-defeating because you can't bullshit yourself. You might be able to bullshit other people, but you know in that moment, I've not done it. And that's when that fight, flight, freeze will kick in. So, yeah, I think it's consistency. Everyone knows its importance, but yeah, being able to actually hold yourself accountable to it. This is how I'm going to show up today. Consistency in mindset as much as anything, not just doing the work. And then being able to reflect on it on the day after, you know, at the end of the day rather, and being able to propel yourself into the next day. Super powerful.
I think that's where a lot of people get mental skills confused, is it's not just about sitting there and wishing and hoping. No. Right? Do you think that's probably where a lot of people, like, they just look at it that? Like, that's obviously great, but that's not even scratching the surface. No. It's about evaluating everything that's going on, mapping it out, charting out whatever you want to do, but like, you know, confidence comes from competence is what I've heard before a lot of the time, which is you're essentially saying the same thing. It's not like we wish or we hope that when we get into this position we're ready for it. It's like, well, no, I'm just more aware of what's going on around me. If I've done the work, whatever that looks like, when it comes to that scenario that I may need a little bit of a positive self-talk, or I may need a strategy to sort of get me in the zone where that's to do with pressure, anxiety, whatever it may be. It's about like just taking a step back and coming into that moment. Like mantras is obviously a great way of doing that. I know when like athletes make mistakes, it's like that flush it mentality is pretty common. I heard you say in a podcast where like Dan Carter would smack his leg. Like that's like his way of going, okay, well, I mucked up, moving on to the next play kind of thing. Like talking about it, so maybe addressing the global thing around like, what do you believe mental skills is? Because I think that's probably important as well. We haven't really touched on that. Ironically.
This is why we're only just starting the interview then, isn't it?
and then like, maybe just like if there is a young athlete listening to this, or even probably coaches is probably the more audience, like if they've just got young athletes that they're dealing with and they may be going through something, what are some strategies they can take into it? Okay. Global stuff.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's just go back then to what you think about mental skills. So I'll ask you, have you ever found yourself looking back on something, like a situation that you didn't handle particularly well, And you go, far out, why did I do that? I should have done this, that, or this.
100%.
100%, right? So that doesn't tell me, that tells me it's not that you don't know what to do, right? It's that you just weren't able to do it when the pressure was on, right? And so the idea of pressure is that, you know, some people will see it as a negative. I'm of the opinion that we can only find out what we're truly capable of with it, right? So we need to create a better relationship with pressure. And that's what mental skills allow us to do. Mental skills is the ability, or it's the skill set required to be able to pay attention in the moment, stay present. Because when you are present, when you are in the moment, actually pressure tends to evaporate. Pressure only really manifests when you are worried about what might happen, like the clock's running out, we're not going to score, we're not going to, or when you're thinking about what has happened, I've made all these mistakes, we've conceded, But when we're actually in the moment, you know, and this is where we bore people to tears with focus on the process, but if you genuinely can do that, pressure tends to evaporate. It doesn't mean that anything's any less important. It just means that I'm not paralyzing myself with this fear of what I have done or this fear of what might happen. And mental skills is the skill set. So whether that's things like training confidence, training calm, emotional regulation, visualization, you know, imagery. I know you had a guy recently talking all about breath work, you know, being able to understand the link between physiology and psychology, and you know, there's so many layers to this, and so when you ask me, you know, an athlete or a coach that's struggling with something, I don't think there's a one size fits all. Rather, I think there's some guidelines or parameters which can help people kind of navigate this. So also depending on where they are, so if I've got an athlete who's struggling with something and competition is a fair way off, then I'm going to start with, who are you without a ball in your hands? Let's start there. That for me is foundational, right? And so we'll start there, and then we'll start building. Okay, tell me, what are your goals? Are they extrinsic, intrinsic? You know, are they process, outcome based? Then we start going, okay, talk to me about what good looks like. Then we'll talk about managing mistakes and blah, 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 right?
Sorry to interrupt. How long would that take, you know, on average for an athlete? Is that something that happens in one session, or is that multiple sessions?
No, it's multiple. That said, you know, I have created a Playfilious platform which is kind of self-guided, right? So you can rattle through it quite quick, but like any skill, right? So we frame it, right? It's a skill. You can train this. In fact, you should train this, you know? So if I'm working, as I say, depends how, this is all sort of dependent on how far away competition is. If, on the other hand, I've got an athlete who is playing tomorrow, I'm not asking them, who are you without a footy in your hands? Because in 24 hours, they're going to have a footy in their hands. And I need to help them in that moment, right? So in that moment, it's more about, I'll get them to tell me about the work they've done up until this point. I actually get, and a lot of athletes, they overprivilege the week. You know, like they go, I've not had a good week. Good week, mate. You've been playing for 20 years. You've got, you know what I mean? Like, you've been playing for 20 years. Like, you don't. I appreciate you've not had a great week, but come on, and that actually has the same reaction. They have a bit of a laugh about it, which is good, right?
Because they need to zoom out a little bit more.
Great, yeah, because they've just been hammering themselves. You know, they've been the inner critic's just been killing them. So we just start going back, and that's when I'll start getting them to talk about, just describe how it feels when you're at your best, right? Tell me, the sensations, what you're thinking about, all that kind of stuff. And the script I'm trying to flip is that sometimes they'll think they can only feel those things if they're playing good. What I will always advocate, particularly if they've got a lot of experience, is that no, you can play good by feeling these things. So let's really go back, go and watch some highlights, watch something that evokes those feelings, and then, usually, and again, this is a little bit overgeneralized, but then I'll usually say, right, if I'm watching you tomorrow, what 3 things am I going to see? And I'm not talking about how many tries you're going to score or assists. What am I going to see from you? Oh, you're going to see I'm talking. You're going to see that my body language is good. You're going to see that I've got intent in my defence. Sweet. All those three things, all in your control. And go do it, right? And so that's if I was, 24 hours before game day. And then if it's anywhere in between, it's who knows? Because you know what I mean? Like it's a bit of a horses for courses type thing.
Of course. Have you ever had any experiences with, whether it be organisations or well, it's probably organisations or teams that when you're working with an athlete, they're kind of like, no, we don't want you coming as an outsider perspective? Or have you always been welcomed into, I know the Panthers are a bit different because you're employed by them, but say an individual athlete reaches out to you and let's say the club catches on or
with you.
Whatever happens, it maybe media picks up on it and then all of a sudden, I know, for example, it's been used in the States before, like someone's secret weapon.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden everyone wants to use them, but then all the clubs say, no, we can't use that person because they know what this particular player thinks. And like that's kind of like sharing that confidential information across multiple areas. Have you ever had that?
So I haven't yet. I've had it where people just don't understand what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And people who you're thinking, you really should understand this. Like you're in your position and you don't understand what we're doing here. They've got why can't they just turn leave that at the door? We're paying them good money to perform. Like why would we need?
If I had $1 every time I heard that.
Why would they need this? And honestly, like that's as I mentioned sort of a bit earlier. It's like, well, I can't work in this environment if you're not understanding of this, and I'm not going to try and convince you either because. Well, one, I don't have the time, but I don't have the inclination to try and convince people either. I work with people who are interested in it, and as I said, because of the trend, I'm not short on people who want to do the work. You know what I mean? Like maybe if I was 20 years ago and I'm trying to build a business based on this new thing, I'd be working with a lot of people and trying to convince them. But so if we go to your point about conflicts of interest, that's what we're calling it really, if you've got working with all these different people. It is something that we managed with the Panthers, for example. So in 2023 season we ended up playing the Warriors in the first finals game, and so as it happens, Shaun didn't actually play in that game. He had an injury, but it was something that we managed, with. I spoke to Ivan, spoke to the players, so I just took myself out of meetings. But the point is, I didn't have to, but what you said before, perception's reality, right? So I just wanted to get rid of any...
inkling that might...
Yeah, any inkling at all. But anyone who works with me knows we don't talk about other people, right? It's about you. Mental skills is about you, and it's about you being your best. It's not about how you're going to get one over on such and such and we go, oh, well, I know if you say this, then he's going to... Like, that isn't who I am. And Ivan and I have got a very good relationship. I always run it by... So right now, I've got assistant coaches at NRL clubs that'll do work with me. And, everyone I work with, I just run it past Ivan just out of respect. But he's always, he's just, yeah, of course, no worries. Because he knows how I work with them. I'm not in there going, oh, this bloke. So, it's my whole business and brand is built on that trust and confidentiality, which I remember Cooper Cronk getting criticised for it because I think he was doing some stuff at Melbourne and Roosters at the same time. And some of the media were going, how can you do that? Well, you can. I can go and work with you and talk about you and how you can perform, and then I can go and work over here and talk about you. You don't have to, just because you can't do it. You know what I mean? Like, just because you can't do it, just because you talk about people behind their backs or try and get one up, doesn't mean everyone does. So I don't know. It's a funny one, but yeah, I think I do limit. I use a lot of judgment. After I started working with Shaun, a few of the Warriors boys reached out, and I was like, "Nah, I can't work with heaps of people." In our, they were one of the rivals in 2023. So, but yeah, it's one of them things which I'm very grateful to have people reach out, and being in different sports as well sort of is good. You know, you can take a lot of learning from different environments, different sports, different ways of doing things. So yeah.
I was going to ask this earlier, but I want to wrap up on this sort of idea here, because people are probably listening, and I'm sure there's some amazing takeaways in there. But we've mentioned Shaun Johnson, Nathan Cleary, all these amazing teams and organisations. Obviously, you didn't start in that position, or how do you build up to that? Because I think a lot of the success that people leave, the clues are actually in how they got there. Trusting the process again.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you just woke up and all of a sudden you're at the Panthers and you're working with these guys. Like, that's certainly not how it happened.
Yeah.
You mentioned like Shaun there, and then a few other wanted to reach out. Yeah. Obviously, that's from doing a good job. But how did you get your first break? I always find it really interesting to hear people's quote unquote like first big break.
Yeah. So I used to be a teacher. And when I was teaching so I worked in Manchester in some really tough schools, then I moved to Sydney and worked in a really nice school, so both ends of the continuum. And I was exploring ideas around mindset, positive psychology, motivation in a school setting. And based on that work, I was given a scholarship off the government. And the scholarship allowed me, this is 2010, the scholarship allowed me to travel and meet the world's leading experts in mindset, motivation, positive psychology. I had to come back and share those findings. So I started writing a blog, I started presenting at conferences, and I was doing that for a couple of years. And then, I forget the exact time, but at one particular point in time, I was talking about fixed and growth mindsets. And it was a big education conference. And I put up pictures of two Australian tennis players who perhaps sort of self-sabotaged a little bit with the way that they went about their craft. And I wasn't making commentary on those two specifically, but I was just saying, why is it that high performers sometimes self-sabotage? And there's a myriad of reasons. But one of them was going back to this idea we were talking about, I am what I do. And so what happens if I'm not going well? It's better to protect myself by acting in a certain way. Anyway, about 3 days later, I get a phone call from Tennis Australia. And I'm thinking, shit, I'm in trouble here. I shouldn't, I went out on one there, I shouldn't. And they said, no, we're actually quite interested in you coming in and having a chat, because it was an education conference, but someone high up at Tennis Australia is married to a teacher who happened to be at the conference. And that was when I first learned about word of mouth, Geordie. So word of mouth, got there, and then you know what it's like in sport. We ended up doing a 2-year engagement with Tennis Australia, working with all their coaching staff, working with parents around all the stuff we've spoken about today. And then the AIS heard what I was doing, and then the NRL. And so the NRL actually paid for me to essentially present to any club that was interested. And at the time, there was only 16 teams in the comp. I think I spoke to 11 of the 16. Panthers were one of them. Struck up a good relationship with Kevin Kingston there. In the meantime, the Sharks engaged me to spend some time with them. Spent some time at Tigers as well, so interesting to see both sides or both ends of the table, so to speak. And then when the thing with Tigers went the way it did, when Madge got asked to leave, I basically spoke with Ivan and he was like, come along, do you want to head out west? I was like, let's go. So it was, and as I say, and then, little things on Insta or whatever, and then another athlete reaches out and this and that. So I working now with the Swifts in netball. I work with members of the Wallabies, members of Socceroos. But I think it's because of my education roots, I also do a lot of work with emerging athletes as well. So kids in pathways programs that's why I put Play Fearless together, to kind of really get it into the hands of anyone who's interested in it. So it's cool, mate. Like it doesn't matter what sport you play. I'm interested. If you're interested, I'm interested.
And do you find like I love working with youth athletes. I always have, but I feel like now, as I'm getting a bit older.
Older. How old are you?
Just turned 30.
You are old. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Right. That's it. You've crossed the threshold.
Well, I still feel like now they're facing different challenges to when I was a youth athlete.
For sure.
Right, and so on and so forth. So I feel like when you're at that bottom end of the emerging athlete, you're also getting information that you wouldn't get otherwise, which is why, again, I love working with them so much, because there are things they're saying that they're doing. I'm like wouldn't dream of doing that when I was playing.
And I'm just looking at so my son's in playing Harold Matthews Rugby League, and there's Instagram pages based on who's playing this weekend and players to watch and how. Mate, it's under 17s. Ease up.
Yeah.
What do you mean players to watch? I'll give you a tip. There's no players to watch. Just let them play. You know what I mean? Just leave them be. But they can get sucked into that. You know. And and that's just that example. But all the other stuff. There's so much stuff with younger kids that, like you say, like. Mate, I'm 47, you know, so I sometimes feel pretty removed actually from some of the things that they're talking about. But yeah, I think the fact, if we go back to that idea of them being informed, being interested, and understanding that sport, you know, whether you make it or not, you know, sport's just an incredible vehicle for self-development. You know, like all the life skills that you that can help you be successful wherever you end up in life, you can learn and craft in sport. So yeah, emerging athletes, I think they're a really cool space to work with.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. You mentioned a few times like the resources you have available. I know you have your own podcast. You've got two, which I also found out, which I didn't know about. People to follow you, learn more, and coaches in particular. Like, where would you direct coaches towards if any of the resources in particular?
So playfearless.com, that actually has my mental skills platform, which individuals can engage with, but what we're lots of clubs and schools with high-profile sports programs are licensing it and basically put them through. And what that does is they get to work through self-paced, but then I actually jump on calls with them as well and dig into things to really contextualize it. So playfearless.com is a good spot, and then just on Insta like Dan Hasler. That you'll get me one way or another through there.
Either that, or you reach out to Des Hasler and
well, Des Hasler, absolutely, yeah. He gets a lot of emails from me, you know? Just passing it on.
Mate, no, thank you very much for your time. It was knowledge everywhere, left, right, and centre. Obviously, crazy time of year as well, so I appreciate you taking the time to chat. And mate, we're looking forward to seeing how everyone responds to this. I'm sure it'll be great. And honestly, I could sit here and just keep talking for part 2 and 3. So
well, we should do that. We can definitely do part 2 and 3. Yeah, sweet, awesome.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordy. Cheers, mate.